Shabbat Shalom and welcome to our first week of study of Pirkei Avot for the year 2022, also known as 5782. Recently, I attended a bat mitzvah ceremony, which began when the rabbi removed the Torah from the ark. She passed it to the great-grandmother of the bat mitzvah girl, who handed the Torah, still wrapped, to her son, the grandfather of the bat mitzvah girl, who handed it to his son, who handed it to the bat mitzvah girl, thus literally passing that tradition through 4 generations. This wonderful ceremony reminded me of what we are about to do today, which is participate physically in remembering the teachings of the oral Torah. For more than 1,000 years, since Gaonic times, it's been traditional to study Pirkei Avot on Shabbat afternoons between Pesach and Shavuot. We are told that this is to bridge the time between the liberation from Egypt and prepare ourselves for remembering the revelation, the receiving of the Torah by Moses at Mount Sinai. So before we begin, please turn in your Siddur Lev Shalem to page 107, where together we recite the blessing before the study of Torah. Marty, can you lead it? Because I can't talk.
Do you have it posted up?
Can you, oh, hang on, guys. I'm sorry, I forgot to share.
It was Lasot B'divrei Torah, but I don't think it is.
No, hang on 1 second. I have it for you.
I'll read it. Baruch atah Adonai. There we go.
Okay.
Eloheinu
Baruch atah Adonai
melech
Eloheinu olam.
Melech haolam.
Asher
The sovereign
kitshanu
of time and space. Yes. Go ahead.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'harevna Adonai Eloheinu.
Divrei Torah. Yeah.
Or Pirkei Avot. Harevna.
Okay.
Okay, forget it. Okay, it's enough.
Well, there we are for that. But we are instructed us to engage with the words of Torah through the observance of the mitzvot. Now, if we turn to page 235 in Lev Shalem, which Maida has posted for us. Marty, can you read that?
All Israel have a portion in the world that is coming, as it is written, your people shall all be righteous. They shall possess the land forever. They are a shoot of my planting, the work of my hands, in whom I shall be glorified.
And we thank Isaiah for that. This is traditionally read before each chapter, each parak of Pirkei Avot. Today, I want to thank you for joining me as I give you my thoughts about Pirkei Avot in general and the beginning verses of chapter 1, starting on page 235 in Lev Shalem or 257 in the blue Sim Shalom. Chapter 1 begins with Moses received the Torah at Sinai. He transmitted it to Joshua, and Joshua to the elders, whoever they were, the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great assembly. We know we have the written Torah. We've had it for a very long time. But in addition, we're told that we also received the oral Torah, which was transmitted from teacher to student for all these generations, but it was never written down. However, about 250 in the Common Era, Rabbi Judah Hanasi felt that the oral law would be forgotten unless it was transcribed, and then he began the compilation of the basics of the oral law into a 6-part document called the Mishnah. The Mishnah includes all aspects of Jewish law, including agriculture and holidays. But one of the tractates is completely different from all the others, sort of like Monty Python, now for something completely different because it's totally devoted to morals, values, and ethics. And this section literally translated as fathers, is what we are studying today. So here we go. We read the beginning on page 235. These elders, who we'll talk about, these men of the Great Assembly, formulated 3 precepts: be cautious in rendering a decision, rear many students, and build a fence to protect the Torah.
Roberta, rather than
Yes.
taking up all of our faces, could people text if they don't have some copy of Pirkei Avot? Because I can put up the text on the screen, but then we can't see each other's faces. So raise your hand, or for those of you who aren't doing video, just add a text if you need this. Otherwise, we'll assume you have some, some text. Wouldn't need to be the one that, okay, great.
Okay. So what I wanted to say is that these first 2 chapters trace the uninterrupted transmission from the first rabbis, from Moses through the first rabbis. What they do is they establish authority for the Mishnah. What was this thing? And why should we believe them? That's what they're doing. Do we know who the men of the Great Assembly were who were writing all this down? If you look on your page 235, Rabbi Gordon Tucker says, we don't know. We don't even know if it was all people in one generation. All we know is that this was an oral tradition that was handed down in its pithy remarks, and we've received it now.
Roberta, just one point. Could you please, because I have the Hirsch translation, could you just tell us chapter and number when you do it?
Yes, that's a good point. Zelda.
Thanks so much.
So what we've read here is that in chapter 1, verse 1, Mishnah 1, Moses received Torah at Sinai, and he transmitted it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets, etc. Through the end of that Mishnah. Anybody have any comments on that? Here we are getting our authority. When Wes says we can't do this or that in the temple, we can't eat this food, it's got to be catered by a kosher caterer. Why? Because of this, it was transmitted. Velda, what did you want to say?
Oh, I just wanted to say that Aaron's name is left out. And the first time I studied this, the comment was made that Aaron was omitted after the destruction of the temple.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And why is that, Velda? Why do you think that is?
I think because after the destruction of the temple, it was like a diaspora. So we had our own,
we were no longer paying strict attention to what the priests said.
Right.
And Aaron was that was the direct line from Aaron with the priestly,
Correct.
The priests. Marty, did you want to
Also-
say? Oh, okay.
Sorry. Marty, go ahead.
No, Maida, please.
Okay, I was just going to point out, I believe, if my history's right, that during the times even before the destruction, there were a lot of competing camps of influence. Is that fair?
Yeah.
And that the
More
priest-
than competing. Yes.
And that the priestly camp and those that became our sages and rabbis were not the same.
Right.
So that makes sense that when they were laying out why what they were about to say had yichus, that he would be excluded. I never noticed that before, Velda. That was great.
I know the Kohanim were definitely excluded.
Absolutely. They were the Sadducees. And the rabbis were the Pharisees. Developed into the rabbis. They were in conflict with each other. The Pharisees, the rabbis won. And why do we know they won? Because we have that authority of the tradition that we've been studying weekly on Saturday afternoon since about 5,080 something of the Common Era. So, Velda, that's wonderful. Thank you. Continuing,
Did you want to?
please.
I did.
One sec, go ahead.
I think when you think about the Sadducees, the Sadducees, there was an element as in the first century before the temple was destroyed, that the Sadducees were, number one, corrupt, and number two, they were in league with the Romans. They
Right.
were buddy with the Romans.
Right.
When the temple was destroyed, the Romans took over, the Sadducees were gone. They had no more power base. And I think that whoever said that Aaron's name doesn't show up here is absolutely right, because that reflected the complete abdication of the leadership to the Rabbanim, who were the Pharisees. So that's
Sid, thank you. That's so insightful. Thank you. Thank you. So here we have our authority, which we're passing on verse 2, Mishnah 2, to Simon the Righteous. We're not quite sure who he was either. There are 3 or 4 different people who are cited. But he was one of the last members of this fictional, maybe, great assembly. And his favorite teaching was the world stands on 3 things. We all say together, the Torah, worship, and good deeds. Al HaTorah, Al HaAvodah, the Al Gemilut Chesedim. That's who we are. That's what we've got. And he passed it on in Mishnah 3 to somebody with an unusual name for our rabbis, Antiochus. And
Antigonus.
if anybody else,
Antigonus.
how do you say it?
Antigonus.
Antigonus, thank you. Who received the tradition from Shimon the Righteous, who died young. And Antigonus took over his school. And a favorite teaching of his was, please, if someone can read it for me.
I'll read it.
Okay.
Al tiyu ka'avadim hameshamshim et harav al manat lakabel pras.
Right.
Don't be like servants who serve their master expecting to receive a reward. Ella havu ka'avadim shemeshamshim et harav shelo al manat lakabel pras. Be rather like servants who serve their master unconditionally with no thought of reward. Be morah shamayim alechem, and let the fear of heaven determine your actions.
Isn't that wonderful? Anybody else have
think-
thoughts about that?
I personally believe that this business about fear of heaven, yirat shamayim, when, like it says in the Torah about the Amalek, the lo yirei Elohim, that's what we call today, they had no conscience. We, in the biblical vocabulary, it's fear of heaven, fear of God. In modern terminology, it's having a conscience. I must say, we have a wonderful example going on in Ukraine right now of people who are who do not fear God or who have no conscience. They're the brutalities that we see every night on TV are a perfect example of the work of people who have no conscience.
Thank you. You're right. You're right. And what you've done, I'm sure you meant to do it, is you have led us in to the next Mishnah, which introduces the Yosis, Yossi ben Yotzer and Yossi ben Yohanan. They were a pair. They call them Zugim. But who were they? One was actually from a priestly family, but he was a member of the legislative branch. While in all of these pairs, the other was a member of the courts. He was a judge. So just what you were talking about, we have the two different seats of power talking about the same situation. And I think that's so what you've just led us right into it, Sid. Thank you.
Roberta, before we move on, can you just make another comment on the prior pasuk?
Please.
So I find it interesting and almost subversive. I mean, clearly the master and the servant is God and the people. It's not, this isn't applying to employees and employers. And they should be paid. And it's subversive because so much of our tradition is a very simplistic reward and punishment formulation, but we all know that doesn't really work as much as we say it in the daily prayers. So this is kind of an answer. I read this as an answer to that problem. It's saying, don't expect simple reward and punishment. Do things because they're the right thing to do.
It's a good point.
It's very good.
Yeah, beautiful.
Love that.
Thank you. Thank you. What I've just done, what Sid has just done, is led us into Mishnah 4. Does anyone want to read Mishnah 4 and Mishnah 5 are two different versions of of how we should treat our houses and think about our houses and our teachers. Can someone read those? Let's see, Marty, can you read those?
In English or in Hebrew?
Why don't you do in English?
All right. Yosef ben Yotzer, a man of Zerida, and Yosef ben Yochanan, a man of Jerusalem, received the oral tradition from them. Shimon the righteous and Antigonus, Yosef ben Yotzer used to say, let thy house be a house of meeting for the sages, and sit in the very dust of their feet, and drink in their words with thirst.
Okay.
Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yosef ben Yochanan, a man of Jerusalem, used to say, let thy house be wide open, and let the poor be members of thy household. Engage not in too much conversation with women. They said that this was with regard to one's own wife. How much more does the rule apply with regard to another man's wife? From here, the sages said, as long as a man engages in too much conversation with women, he causes evil to himself. He neglects the study of the Torah, and at the end, he will inherit Gehenna.
Okay. May I have your permission, my co-students in our study hall, to not talk about that second part of the Mishnah for right now. Controversial, explosive, etc. But I think that the first part is really, really important, and that's why I chose it. I want to give you, Sid?
I want to say a word about the way that paragraph was written. You notice that it says, Yossi ben Yoezer ish Tzereda, a man of Tzereda, and Yossi ben Yochanan ish Yerushalayim. Now
Right.
This reminds me of the New Testament version where he says Judas Iscariot. Judas Iscariot is
Karaite.
Ishkariot. And here we see in this Mishnah, the same formulation, Ish Yerushalayim, Ishkariot. I'm just throwing that out.
No, I agree. Anne?
But it would really be that the New Testament is following this formulation, not the other way around.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is a convention of how you identify a person. They have a first name, Judas, and then a place name where they're from, Ishkariot.
It's sort of like the surname Yerushalmi from
Well,
Jerusalem.
it's changed now because we don't bother with the word Ish in there.
Right, but we use me instead of, we use a suffix to say from where.
Right, to identify which
We do, but
one.
in today's world, we have a personal name and then we have a family name.
Right.
And that's how people are designated. In the Bible, you didn't have this formulation. You had a formulation of the person and then who his father was, or
Right.
who his tribe was. So this shows an evolution of this naming process. And
Yep.
certainly in this 200 CE, this business of identifying somebody by their residence, Ish Yerushalayim is the convention.
Does it perhaps, I'm wondering, I don't know, reflect also the loss, the fact that of diaspora, that we don't know the actual real patronymics. We don't know the tribes anymore. We still,
That's
I think-
interesting.
I think
still have Halevi. We still
Okay,
have-
may I just want to interrupt for a moment because what I've prepared for next, I think will tie a lot of that together. I spent a lot of time on this because they said we're told that these guys, these two Yosis, were members of an ascetic group known as the Hasidians. They weren't living in Jerusalem with the priests. They were like the Essenes, maybe they were Essenes, living out in the desert alone. They have a whole different group of people. And that being said, when we're told that to open your house and sit with the teacher, I'm thinking they've got itinerant preachers. They're inviting itinerant preachers to come into their homes and teach them. The preachers would sit on a bench or on the chair, and they would sit literally at his feet. His feet would be dirty because he's walking out in the desert to get there. They're bringing in that dust. The people would be sitting at their feet. And when they moved from one house to another house, the people would follow them. I read one commentary that a rabbi or a scholar would say, hey, let's meet over at Yosei's house, because that's a good one. And the preacher's going to be over there this evening. We'll study with him. If you think about it that way, I think the Peshat of this is much less spiritual, which is talking about how to improve your house as your body, your person, and much more simple. Let's all go over to make our houses good for these preachers to come in and teach us, and wait eagerly for them. And not only just the rich people, but let the poor people come in too. Not necessarily slaves, we're too used to slaves, but have the poor people come in. We'll pay them for handing out the wine and the bread, and we'll all study together. Does that make sense to anybody? What do you think of that? It's my brainstorm of the week. So you better say you like it.
It's terrific. It's
Okay.
terrific. But
So-
you know, it's let your house. It's such a beautiful definition of humility. I think that whole sentence is just, yeah, the dust of their feet, and you know, it's. But we were listening very thirstily to your words.
Well, that's
Roberta, I'd like to come to say something about what you just said.
Please.
What I see here is there is a great zeal about study and learning the Torah. And what does this reflect? This, to me, reflects, again, the great change.
Mhm.
No more sacrifices.
That's right.
The way you worship is you study the works, the Torah, which is God's word. That's how you worship. It's just as valid as offering bulls and sheep. This is remarkable because if you think about it, here the Jews had a war with Rome for 2 years, and their temple was destroyed, and the city of Jerusalem was certainly harmed greatly. Some other crowd would have said, our God is no good. Our God is not defending us. We're lost. We're wiped. We're out of here. We're out of business. But no, these rabbis said, actually, we have a substitute plan, Plan B.
Plan B.
Which is to study God's word. And here it is.
Absolutely. I agree. I
And
agree.
I'll also
Maida?
add on to that. I think the reference to make the poor welcome as members of your household is actually more about the fact of not making it an elitist activity.
Right.
So you don't have to pay the cost of admission to be able to sit at the table.
Which
No
ties,
high tuitions, no student loans.
which ties into not including the Kohanim as part of the route of transmission.
Exactly. Exactly.
By the way, this is like the learning part has nothing to do with this, but it also reminds me in a funny way of something my parents told me used to happen in Hungary a lot within the Jewish community, that, you know, the weddings were on Sundays, and, you know, you'd have like 5 or 6 or 7 weddings in a day on a Sunday. And by the way, the more expensive weddings were the earlier ones because you didn't have to fast as long. So, you know, I mean, it's really, no, really. And but people would, you know, teenagers, you know, people in their 20s would decide which weddings to go to based on, okay, so the people at the wedding at 12, they have really good desserts, so we'll go there later, but the people at 2 o'clock have really good appetizers, and they would organize themselves by the foods being served.
And I have heard of this also, of people reading obituaries. And not Jews necessarily. Reading obituaries and figuring out if they were going to serve a meal afterwards, who was going to have the best meal, and going to that funeral. Oh, well. Oh, well. One other thing about these 2 Yossis, they were called the last of the Eshkolot. Anybody? Does that sound familiar to anybody? It means the wise men. bunches of grapes are the Ish, they said they were the Ish Kol, those who knew everything. Because after that, we had two different schools, the school of Shammai and the school of Akiva. We started to have a separation of studies. And I just thought I'd throw that in there because I thought, anybody have any sense about that? Come on.
Yeah, there is a Hebrew expression, ish kolot, it's somebody that is knowledgeable in many areas.
Many areas. Yep. Thank you, Yael. Well,
It also might mean that they're open to many perspectives, because when you get to Hillel and Shammai, there's not really, you get one opinion versus another opinion, and maybe not the same kind of open-mindedness.
yep. Okay. Marty,
Yes.
do you want to read Mishnah 5 again and talk about how that relates to what we've been talking about? Open wide the doors of your house and make the poor welcome. Any more thoughts about that you have?
About opening the doors wide to the poor?
Yeah, to everybody,
I think we pretty well covered it. It's kind of, self-explanatory, is that
Yeah.
the Torah and the Mishnah are not exclusive to elite people. They are open to everybody. And I think that just is a terrific a way to look at things, rather than other religions, which used to have their sacred books, scurried away by their clergy, never to be read by a common man.
Also, I think that it refers back to Mishnah 3, where it says it was a favorite teaching, do not be like servants who serve their masters to receive an award, but rather to serve their masters unconditionally. So we're talking about people who are there because they're serving, but that's where they want to be. They're there because out of a choice.
Right.
We are at 1:25. We just have a few more minutes to study together. Who else has something to say in this parak in chapter 1 that talks to them? Anybody? Because I think it's just such a rich one. How about in parak 14 and 15? And I think 16 has a really fabulous teaching in it. Somebody want to read 16?
I'll read it.
Okay,
Do you want it in English or Hebrew?
English.
I'm reading a different translation, just so you know.
Okay.
So 16. Rabban Gamliel used to say, get yourself a teacher, avoid doubt, and do not make a habit of giving tithes by guessing.
What does he mean by that? What is going on there? Other commentaries say don't overpay your taxes.
The IRS would say, don't guess, do the math.
Do the math. Isn't that interesting? 2,000 years ago, don't guess. Do the math. You can do your quarterlies, but by the end of the year, tot it up. I love it.
Yeah,
Isn't it
I'm
great?
actually intrigued by verse 8,
Yeah.
which is Yehuda ben Tabai.
Yeah.
When sitting as a judge, do not act as an advocate. When the parties to a lawsuit come before you, regard them both as guilty, but when they leave you, having accepted the verdict, regard them both as innocent. I'm very intrigued by that.
Not innocent until proven guilty, but guilty until proven innocent. fascinating, but I expect them both to be in the same position.
Right.
Don't act as an advocate for one or the other if you're a judge.
And interestingly, but when they leave, consider them both innocent, even though one was found guilty. And I think
Well,
that
but,
Joel,
and I would, oh,
I think Joel wanted to say something. Oh, okay. His green frame was on for a moment there. Okay, Maida?
to your point, Anne, about that, I think it is the fact that post-judgment, it's a level playing ground now. By accepting the judgment, we are back to no harm, no foul, no,
okay, but
justice has been served, so therefore innocence.
But is this about a civil matter or a criminal matter? It doesn't say.
It doesn't say.
Well, but if it was a criminal matter and judgment was posed and punishment may, in ancient times, punishments were very different than they are now. And in the Jewish world, it often had to do with monetary compensation for damage. Even if it was a crime, it was money that you gave in compensation. So if the judgment was fair and some penalty was also supplied, nonetheless, by accepting that and, that you will do it, then once again, I propose level playing ground because the justice was served.
Okay, so I'm going to throw a curveball, or maybe not a curveball, but because I don't really know anything about baseball, other than they play it, and that the Red Sox are Boston's team, but and the Yankees are New York, and we hate the Yankees. What if one party has repeatedly done this action and repeatedly is found guilty?
Right. I refer you to Alana Payne Stein of Hartman fame.
Yes.
Because she's actually done, if she's done whole sessions on these exact kinds of questions and how the rabbis tried to deal with it.
And do you have any, from her, do you have any, anything to that she might add?
It depends on whether it's a crime against heaven or a crime against others.
We
Go
have
ahead,
a comment,
Roberta.
excuse me, Maida, we have a comment coming in from Texas. Cliff has his name up.
I have my hand up.
This.
And it really wasn't, it's tangentially related to that. In number 6, it also says, accept a teacher upon yourself, acquire a friend for yourself, and judge everyone favorably. And of course, you were looking at 16, which also talked about accept a teacher upon yourself. And I wonder to what extent accepting a judge is accepting a teacher, at least in a limited sense. And frankly, the hardest part is finding the teacher. Who is the teacher that you really want to accept? And then you need friends who are your Hebruta partners to kind of discuss these things. And then you're still not supposed to judge, or judge favorably until there's a conclusion rendered by the teacher, the judge in that instance.
May I suggest that you may think differently about it if you go back to the itinerant preacher model.
Mm-hmm.
You're choosing which one. This guy comes through town. Gosh, that teacher sounds, the one who came in from the other side of the river came over last week and it was wonderful. I'm going to go hear him down the road today. You want to go with me, study buddy? Does that make sense?
Well, isn't
Sid, are you laughing at me?
Who?
Sid, I thought he was laughing at me. No?
I think, but that was the itinerant Maggie, who went around teaching, telling
Right.
stories.
Right. Right.
Could also be Jesus, but anyway, that's,
Deb, well, we do certainly have a model going there, don't we?
Yeah.
Yes, we do. But that's okay. That's okay. It's a good model.
We have to keep in mind that the opportunities for entertainment in those days were very slim. There were no movies, there was no radio or TV, there were no stage productions. An itinerant preacher could get an audience because that's a change of pace for a community. That worked for Jesus, and I'm sure it worked for many, many itinerant preachers. And the stories of people like Isaac Bashevis Singer are about these itinerant rabbis who would go from village to village and give a speech and a sermon, and then they would get a meal and so on.
How about Shabbatai Tzvi?
Say it again?
Shabbatai Tzvi.
Oh, well, Shabbatai Tzvi is a special case.
A special
You're right.
case, but he was
You're
an
right, he was
itinerant.
a preacher who also was an itinerant. Unfortunately, the goods he had to preach about turned out to be misleading.
But
Right.
that leads right, and I think Cliff brings up, a really good point, which is if you are seeking a teacher who can make a difference to you, I think a little bit of it is that you shouldn't completely abdicate your mind. That relates to what Sid was talking about with false prophets. It's hard to find a teacher that you trust enough to open yourself up to, but that you yourself don't give up yourself. That's what I'm saying. You have to stay engaged. I don't know if that's where you were going, Cliff, but I think part of it is to make that determination. You know what I mean? We've sort of all been there. We have many more options in today's world.
well, I like I agree with that. I kind of like the idea where it says, let your house be a meeting place for sages. Your house is not necessarily your physical house, but your mind, being open-minded to listen to others and that's, we are sitting in the dust of their feet right now, just as we're talking about the Pirkei Avot. So, and drinking in their words, I don't know about thirstily, but we're at least drinking them in. But yeah.
You're right. You're right. If somebody can see it and read it, the commentary on page 235 on the left, Tamar Elad Applebaum's, talks about that. Can someone read that? Esther?
Which
Do you have that on the 235 on the English side? Tamar Elad Applebaum's commentary?
Oh, yes. At the opening of Avot, we find an ancient mythic picture of transmission, a portrait of a Jew in one generation or another being handed a treasure made of words, foundational questions and thoughts, and passing it on across time to generations that he or she will never meet, yet he or she feels close to them and responsible for them. This treasure, passed from one generation to another, always comprises two complementary components, a body and its clothing. The body is the written Torah, the sacred scriptures assembled by the ancients. The clothing is the oral Torah, the people's responses echoing at the encounter with this scripture. In that encounter, the voice of every generation weaves itself into the fabric of conversation that came before it or is yet to come after. All of those generations are constantly at work deciphering the Holy One's ongoing revelation to humankind. The first teaching of Pirkei Avot provides us with a mythic picture of continuous transmission and participation. In this state of soul called Sinai, we encounter a spiritual continent in search of meaning, inspiration, and purpose. This continent, where God and people meet, is called Torah.
Thank you. Is that, Cliff, does that make some,
Absolutely. I love that.
that's why she gets the big bucks.
What do deer have to do with it? No,
Sid?
no. That's why you said that's why she gets the big bucks. I said, what do deer have to do with it? Never mind.
Oh, a Texas reference.
Okay, okay.
Oh,
Got it.
Okay, so I just wanted to add a gloss on what's being said. A friend of mine told me about a book that just came out called Under Jerusalem. It's a history of the archaeologic explorations in the city, in the old city of Jerusalem. And I subscribe to the Jewish Review of Books, and sure enough, that book is reviewed. And one of the highlights that was in the review was a sentence that went something like this. I'm not quoting it because I don't have it in front of me, but he said, when they dug to find, like pieces of the old temple of Solomon, they didn't find anything. He said, it turns out that in Jewish archaeology, it's the word that is the treasure. The written word is the treasure, not some golden image or some statue, but it's the word. Isn't that great?
It's very good.
and here we are passing on the same words.
Right. That's the point.
That's the point.
So, number nine actually says, examine the witnesses thoroughly and be careful with your words.
Yes.
That's right there, lest they learn through them falsely.
The Chofetz Chaim also in there. Be careful with your words.
Yeah.
I love in number 7, Mishnah 7, where we're taught to keep far from an evil neighbor. He's not a partner. Do not partner with an evil person, and never despair of retribution for the wicked. Beware of those evil people. I love it. They knew them. They knew those guys.
Today that is the problem.
Excuse me?
I'm sorry. An aside, not important.
Asides are important. What did you say?
No, it was an aside. I made a snarky remark.
Oh, okay. And you won't share it. Okay. All right. Next week, Anne is going to, no, Stephen is going to teach us, who I've never met, but people tell me that he does a very nice drash for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will interface with him. We'll dialogue about his drash on Parak 2. So I wanted to tell you that. And that's sort of where we are today.
Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you all so much.
Thank
And
you.
my apologies about the small technical challenges. Marty, you would have been a pro. Oh, he's gone. I'll have it fine for next week.
Okay, and
It's perfect.
You did
it
good.
worked. It worked. And Yael, we need more from you. And Harvey, we need to hear more from you. Okay?
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Shabbat
you all
shalom.
so much.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye-bye.